Hello everybody, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, host of Reformed GGA, and today I'm going to be introducing a series on multi-role guns. That is a gun that is meant to do more than one primary task. It is supposed to be useful in a variety of circumstances. The inspiration behind this series was my recent purchase of the Palmetto State Armory AK-47 GF3, and the simple fact that this is 2020, and in 2020 there have been some very strange goings on, and most of them are not good. And one of the things that has come up is there are a lot of people who are new gun owners, and a lot of those new gun owners are dealing with the situation of relatively low supply of both guns and ammunition, and very high cost of guns and ammunition. And so we have a lot of new gun owners, and they need to be able to get the most out of their guns because there aren't a lot of guns available. So having one gun that can do multiple things makes sense. That's the idea behind a multi-role gun. And like I said, this is going to be an entire series. There's lots of things that we're going to discuss. And I'm going to be using this Palmetto State Armory AK-47 GF3 as my example of my multi-role gun. This is not to say that this is the quintessential multi-role gun for everybody, or that Palmetto State Armory is a perfect company with no flaws whatsoever. There's no company that's out there that's like that, by the way. It's not meant to be an endorsement of this particular gun or this particular platform or the company that produces it or anything like that. And in some ways, we'll talk about the ways in which this maybe isn't such a perfect multi-role gun. This is just an example. What I'm trying to do is help people who are relatively new to firearms, who are dealing with the current situation where we have very low availability, so you're going to have to do the most with what you got, trying to help those kinds of people think through the process of a multi-role gun. So let's go ahead and start with defining the roles that you want your gun to fulfill. This is going to be certainly the most deterministic, and also probably in a lot of ways the most difficult part. A multi-role gun, in fact any gun technically, is going to be a compromise in that, there are just certain compromises that have to be made in the design process of the gun in the first place. But anytime you try to make a gun do multiple things, you're going to wind up having to make compromises along the way in terms of, okay, if I wanted to do this and this, it's probably not going to be super great at either one of those two things. Usually you wind up getting some kind of mediocre in the middle kind of thing. For example, if you want a high precision, long range capable setup, a gun that can, hit a target at 1,000 rounds very easily, sorry, not 1,000 rounds, but 1,000 yards easily, or maybe 1,000 meters, whatever you happen to be using as your standard of measurement. But you want it to be very accurate at a very long distance. But let's say you also want to have the ability for quick follow-up shots. Well, those two things usually work against each other. If you want a very high precision, long distance shot, you want everything locked up nice and tight. So you're usually talking about some kind of a bolt action kind of gun if you want something that's going to be really good at distance. If you want something with quick follow-up shots, you usually don't want bolt action because bolt action is fairly slow. You usually want a semi-auto for that, but semi-autos tend to be a little bit looser. They're not nearly as accurate. Those two things are going to work against each other. And when you come up with some kind of a compromise in the middle, you're probably not going to get something that's super great at either one. You might wind up with a semi-auto that has a good reputation for long range, but it's probably not going to be as good at long range as other kinds of rifles like bolt action rifles would be. And while it might have some decent follow-up shots, because it's designed for long range, it's probably not going to be super maneuverable close in just because it's probably going to have a fairly long barrel on it. Everything's going to be fairly tight on it. Might be a little on the heavy side. Like the FN SCAR, for example, is designed to be relatively accurate at longer, long-ish ranges. But it's kind of a heavy gun, and it's not super long-range accurate, and it's not super great in terms of maneuverability in small spaces and being able to actually exploit the fact that, you know, it's semi-auto, that you can actually get relatively quick follow-up shots in. Can't really do the most with it. There's always going to be compromises. So the first thing that you need to do is define what the roles are, understand that there are going to be compromises, and then also have a very clear idea of what you don't want the gun to be. So in my example, what I'm trying to do with this gun is basically fourfold. And that is a lot of different things. 4 different roles for a gun is very, 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 very difficult. And because of that, there's going to be a lot of compromises, and this gun is really not going to be particularly good at any one of those roles. But the roles that I have set out for it, yours may vary, but the roles that I have set out for this gun are as follows. Number 1, I want this gun to be plinking viable in 2020. That is, I want to be able to go out and shoot this thing fairly frequently, and I want to be able to do so without breaking the bank, as it were. And also, in that whole realm of being plinkable, I want it to be plinkable for multiple people. That is, I like to go shooting with friends and family members. Sometimes there's an overlap there, sometimes there isn't, and such is life. But I like to go shooting with friends and family members. So a gun that is going to work for different people, maybe left-handed and right-handed people, people who are shorter, people who are taller, etc., for me is a really important thing. Now, having a gun with that kind of adaptability is going to cause some problems later on that we're going to see, but for right now, that is one role. It's a plinking gun, and it's a plinking gun that is going to have to be usable, maybe not best, but at least usable by a variety of different people. So that's one role. A plinking gun for a variety of different people. Number 2, I want this gun to be something that I can use as a bedside gun. That is, a gun that I keep, as the name implies, by the bedside for home defense purposes. It has to be viable for that. And in some ways, that's a relatively easy task to accomplish. You take the gun, you set it by your bed, you have a bedside gun. But there are also certain concerns that are going to come up, like what happens if something happens at night? Are you prepared for that? Whatever your sighting system that you use, is it something that is going to work at relatively close quarters and perhaps at night? There are certain things that are going to have to be done. Putting a gun by the bedside is easy, but something that's going to work in close quarters, perhaps in the dark or at very low lighting levels, etc., is going to cause some problems. Another issue that we have in a home defense scenario is that you might be dealing with relatively close quarters, and as you guys can see right off to begin with, this is a fairly long gun. It's certainly not the longest gun that is out there, but it is fairly long. And making sure that the gun is going to be viable for your situation when it comes to home defense in your particular home, that can create different levels of problems. If you have too big of a gun, it might be really hard to get through a doorway with it. There are definitely techniques that can be employed, and that might be part of what we have to do here, but that does create problems. So a plinking gun, a self-defense gun. Another thing that concerns me about 2020 in general is that it's a very chaotic year, and who knows what the future holds. If things go real bad in society, we might find that the normal supply chain of how we get food and those kinds of things goes by the wayside. So another concern that I have is, even though I am definitely not a hunter, is can this gun be used viably for hunting game that is available in my general area that is going to be of a size and present in sufficient quantity to actually get me through some rough times. So, it has to be a plinking gun that is usable by multiple people. Has to be something that can be properly set up for bedside use. I also want something that is going to be a suitable hunting gun, maybe not perfect, but suitable. Like I said, whenever you combine things, you're going to make compromises, and it's never going to be particularly good at any one of those things. And then fourth, last, but certainly not least, we have already seen in 2020 where there has been rioting, looting, and other kinds of just gross disregard for human property, for human worth, for human life, etc., going on in this country's major cities. And if something happens to come to the place where I live, and there's a riot in the streets here, I want to make sure that it's something that can get me out of that situation. Personally, I do not plan on trying to wait a riot out. If I get wind that a riot is starting in my town, I'm going to be packing up all of the essentials in my car and driving as far away from the situation as I think is appropriate. I do not plan on sticking it out. I do not plan on defending my property, as it were, just because if I have to make the choice between property versus my life, I'm going to favor my life. But with a lot of these riots and other things that have been going on, there also has been road blockades by these people. And having a way to get through a crowd, vehicle can do that to a certain extent, but having a way to get through the crowd, and perhaps if the roads have been forcibly blocked, that is, items have been moved in the way, parked vehicles, whatever, are now physically blocking the path. Can you get away on foot, and can you get away from perhaps an angry mob? So a riot-viable gun system comes into play, and that also maybe explains to a certain extent why this gun is, kind of the size that it is, and why it has the power factor that it does. We'll see more about that later on. But for right now, to recap, the 4 things that I want this gun to do is it has to be a sustainable plinking gun in 2020 that is usable by a wide variety of people. That in and of itself is going to be pretty hard to do. Number 2, I want it to be something that is viable as a bedside gun. That presents some challenges. Number 3, this thing has to be viable to hunt with. If the supply chain is interrupted, and I have to get food on my own, which is not going to be a pretty picture, but if I have to do that, I want something that is actually up to the task. And frankly, I don't want to be eating squirrel meat every day. Okay, I want something that's going to sustain me for a little bit longer and frankly taste a little bit better. And then last but not least, the 4th thing on the list is that it has to be something that would be viable in a riot/mob type situation. Like I said, my plan is not to go towards the trouble. My plan is to head in the opposite direction as much as possible. But unfortunately, people do find themselves in situations where they have a mob on one side and no other way out but going through the mob. And having something that can get you through the mob, well, might at least make you sleep a little bit better at night. So, those are the 4 things. And then I also said that when you're coming up with a multi-role gun, it's also a very good idea to have a clear idea about what it is not going to be and what it doesn't need to be. Given how crazy things are, and also given other guns that I already own, the one thing I definitely don't need this gun to be is concealable. Okay, I already have pistols, I already have some ammunition for pistols, okay, I already have concealed carry type guns. That's not going to be a concern for me. It might be for you. Coming up with a do-all gun for other people who don't have any other guns in their collection, having something that is concealable on their person might be at the very top of the list. I already have guns that are concealable, so I don't need this gun to be concealable. If I was to put concealed carry into the list of roles that the gun would have to perform, I would not be coming up with an AK as my primary candidate. Those things are not exactly the most concealable weapons platform that is out there. Another thing that I do not need this gun to be is I do not need it to be particularly this might sound a little bit weird, but I don't need it to be the most user-friendly gun on the planet. Now, I did mention that it has to be plinkable by a wide variety of people. That is true, but I don't need something that is ergonomically perfect in every single way. Something that's going to work for me and work for other people is one thing, but I don't have to tailor it in every single way. This does not have to be a ergonomically perfect, high-performance, competitive type gun. It doesn't need to be that. Suitably simple, yes. Suitably ergonomic, yes. But this is not a competitor's gun. Okay, I'm not trying to get the fastest split times possible, in a competitive shooting type situation. It doesn't have to be fast, super ergonomic. It doesn't have. That's what I meant when I said simple. That's probably not the best way to say it. Simple operationally for different people, plinking wise is a good thing, but it doesn't need to be ergonomically perfect, and it doesn't have to be super fast with follow-up shots and things like that, which also explains why I'm okay with an AK versus, say, an AR or a variety of other guns that are frankly a little bit easier to get back on target. I'm not concerned about having super fast split times here. So it's not a concealed carry gun. It is not a competitor's gun. Those are very clear things that I want to make sure that I stay away from that. That's not the roles that they are in. I'm not going to try to make it one of those things. Those are areas that I'm not really concerned about. If the gun happens to be okay in that, and there's something that I can attach to it or put on it that would help in that, well, that's nice, but that's not the role that I'm going for, so I'm not really going to care about those things. Okay. So we have an idea of what the gun needs to be, what I want it to be, the 4 things that I mentioned before, and we also have in mind a couple of things that it definitely does not need to be. I'm not looking for ways to make it more concealable. Okay, I already have concealed carry guns. I don't need to make this thing more concealable. And 2, I'm not trying to make this into a competitor's gun. Fast follow-up shots and those kinds of things, and some of the tricky devices to make for quick mag changes and all those things, super great ergonomics, are not at the top of my priority list right here. Maybe simplicity in terms of the multiple user thing that I mentioned before, but not simple in terms of trying to increase my speed with it, a millionfold. It doesn't have to be a super fast, precise rifle. It doesn't have to be a competitor's rifle. So that is the basics, just outlining what we're trying to do with this gun. And as we go through the series, we are going to go ahead and basically see what kinds of things that we can add onto the gun to make it more suitable for that. And we're also going to talk about the gun itself and why or why not it might be appropriate for those roles or not. Lots of things to discuss as we go forward, but right now I just wanted to lay out the importance of making sure that you really define the roles, that you understand that you're going to have to make compromises. It's not going to be perfect in any one of those things. As soon as you have multiple roles, you're going to have to compromise. It's not going to be the best in any one category anymore. And also, if you can keep those roles that it has to perform down to a minimum, typically the better it's going to be at performing them. If it only has to do, one thing, well, great. You can make a very specific purpose-built gun and do very well. If it has to do 2 things, that's going to cut its effectiveness quite a bit. And if you start talking about 3 or 4 things like I'm doing, you are really not going to get something that is super great in a lot of the other areas, as it were. So, all that being said, we're going to go ahead and move forward with this series. In the next part, we're going to be talking about basically how the ammunition that this gun uses fits into those 4 roles that we talked about. We're going to go through everything. We're going to go through the ammunition. We're going to go through the basic platform. We're going to start talking about accessories. All of those things we're going to cover. But the first thing that we're going to cover is the ammunition selection itself. A lot of times, more important than the gun itself is the ammunition. A lot of people that I've seen, at least, I don't know how expansive it is, but a lot of people buy guns kind of sort of based on looks. They don't always think about the ammunition that the gun runs and everything that can pertain to that. So that is going to be the next thing that we talk about. All right. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to a true understanding of the real Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.